Simon Larson. I've written a poem based on a horror romanticistic painting. I believe that this painting is very unique by the way it hides details. At first sight, it just looks like any other forest during winter. The trees lack leaves and the ground is full of snow. Nothing seems scary about the forest, but it still seems creepy to me for some reason. But the more you look at it, the more details you start to find. You realize almost right away that there are some ruins from an ancient cult, which gives me chills. The more you concentrate on the ruins, you start to realize that the ruins seems to be some kind of an altar. Maybe even sacrifices have happened here. The reason why I think that sacrifices have happened here is because the entire place is surrounded by what seems to be gravestones. Later, I started to notice the trail of what seemed to be black pillars or something leading out of the ruins. But imagine my surprise when I realized that those pillars actually were people heading into the ruins, dressed in black robes. So I tried to make a connection to the ritual I believe that the men are practicing in the picture. The first thought was that it was something shady about the situation. These men are not normal men. It feels more like they are necromancers that are playing with the dead. Based on the amount of men that are entering the ruins, I believe that they are trying to make something extreme, maybe bringing someone back from the dead. In my poem, I have used my imagination, believing that these men succeeded. They brought someone back. But now this lost spirit is stuck in this world, killing innocent people just for fun. So here follows the poem about the lost soul that I believe is haunting this forest. Into the woods it goes, and if you see it, it knows. The rumor says it's a schizophrenic man's soul, which in purgatory got a hole. Now is stuck between this world and the next. The human part of the soul has purgatory annexed. So if you want to stay out of your life's fight, you should stay close to the light. Because if it's something you can know for sure, then it's definitely that in dark fatality lure. Don't fight the beast just to be bold, cause then you'll become miserably cold. Many have tried to fight it with holy water, but it has always ended in bloodshed and slaughter. The beast can make you feel frozen, but in fact it's your soul he's chosen. Even if you manage to escape, your soul will never again have its former shape. So hear my words carefully, or you might spend eternal misery in purgatory's belly. Keep away from the woods during the eerie nights, or your soul will be chased out of the light. Yes.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I have written a short story based on a horror romantic painting. The painting features a graveyard at dusk. The fog is thick, and the background, you can see a silhouette of a man. The headstones are big and filled with names on them, and one of them, there is a raven who is staring right into the picture. Of course, I've tried to use as much detail as possible to build a setting with the graveyard and to make the short story inspired by the Romantic era. I've also tried to use to make the descriptions and the short story very painting, and to use a lot of environmental descriptions to make the short story inspired by the Romantic era. The way the graves are overfilled made me think about an epidemic, and The Lonely Man made me think about the myths that led up to the creation of Bram Stoker's vampire. The legends of how peasant families thought that all the diseases could be explained whether they had been contaminated by a walking dead made me think about the painting and the crowded graves. To really get the full story, I used the plague that I myself find endlessly intimidating. Therefore, I used those elements to get the background story I needed to explain the picture on a deeper level than just using the environment. The title of my short story is a word game between the plague and the adverb plogged, and resulted in my new gothic monster called the Plagued. Now I'm going to read my story. Not a single leaf rustled on the graveyard that night. The moon was full and made the thick fog look like the souls of the buried swirling around in the dusk. It was mesmerizing. A raven looked at her with its deep, black, and predictable eyes. She looked at the big graves with the peasant families that were first taken. The headstones had at least 20 names engraved on it. But compared to the newer graves, at least they knew who was in there. Anna glimpsed one of the mass graves from distance and fastened her steps. She had seen enough of bloodshed and death for one day. Suddenly Anna heard a raspy cough in the distance. She froze and listened intensively. The silence was deafening. A branch squeaked in the distance and Anna's heart rushed. Her entire body was ready to flee. Something moved quickly in the corner of her eye, but when she turned around, nothing was there. Her heavy breathing made little clouds in the air, and she felt the panic crawling in her body. Then she ran. She now definitely heard steps behind her, and she felt the fog whirling around her face. The heavy, wheezy breathing behind her came closer and closer as Anna ran as fast as she possibly could. Her feet stepped into complete darkness, and when she suddenly lost contact with the ground and fell, she felt her own warm blood streaming down her knee. When she finally reached the little cabin that was her home, she locked the door quickly and collapsed on the floor. Her body was shaking from the fear, and her legs were covered in mud, sweat, and blood. Reluctantly, she looked out the window, and 50 meters down the road, in the shadow of a big tree, there was a man. He stood still as if he was made of stone, and his eyes glittered in the moonlight. Anna ran into the kitchen to get a knife, but when she returned, he was gone. She did not sleep a wink that night. The next day, the hospital was overflowing with dying patients. This was by far the worst day since the outbreak started, and the other nurses was as usual whispering daunting stories about a corpse that had escaped from its grave and haunted the living. Anna wasn't particularly superstitious, but the horrific memory of yesterday night gave her the creeps. The thought of not only a living dead, but also a highly contagious plague-infected ghost, was the most terrifying thing Anna could possibly imagine. After 3 years of working with this disease, she knew no destiny more horrifying than the destiny of the plagued.
Okay, I'm Alexander Johansson, and I have written a short story. I have gathered my inspiration from a picture which illustrates a womanly creature covered in a cloth with arms of a living human, but with a skull for a head covered in a hood. She's standing in the middle of a lake, on top of the water, with really low fog surrounding her, and with mountains reaching above the fog in the background. It's all set at night, with only the light of the moon lighting it all up, which gives it a bluish color. The picture gives me a sense of not knowing, a feeling that you never know that this creature is there, but if you do, there's no escape. I would say that this womanly creature is an angel banished from heaven who now lives to prey on the creatures God loves so much. This picture also gives me a thought of this fallen angel lurking in the fog, luring her victims to this lake where she then drowns them. In the short piece you'll be able to recognize the fog as a big part, and also the thought of not knowing, also the curiosity that sometimes overpowers our fear. Crack, the sound of a twig breaking behind me. A quick look reveals that I'm still alone. As I walk through the forest, I see no end, just trees, with no leaves and the ground covered in them. The moonlight still managed to light up the forest, and I can with no problem walk without the fear of tripping on the roots of the trees. I hear another twig break. This time it sounds a lot closer than before. I gather the courage to take another look behind me. I turn around, but like last time, I can't find any source to the sound. But to my surprise, a dense white fog has formed. A fog so dense you would not be able to see your hand if you held it in front of your eyes. A fog that looks so thick it could devour you and suffocate you. But as I stand there, looking at the fog, mesmerized, the sound of another twig breaking pulls me back to my senses. The sound coming from somewhere in front of me, somewhere inside the fog. I keep staring into the fog, expecting someone or something to escape its grasp. But nothing. Instead, I notice how the fog slowly rolls forward, slowly engulfing everything in its path. And as the fog slowly creeps closer and closer, I start to hear footsteps coming from the fog. I change my mind. I'm not ready to encounter whatever hides in the fog. I turn around, starting to walk away from the fog, which by now is only 20 meters away from me. But as I walk away, the footsteps start to get louder and louder, and with that I walk faster and faster. The footsteps, now sounding like large drums, has me on the edge of my sanity, sweat pouring down my back and my heart beating like a drum roll. Never have I walked this fast in my life without running. The footsteps, as I pass a huge old oak, quiet down. No sound, nothing. Suddenly, another twig breaks. This time, it cannot be from the fog. With the speed I had, it would be hundreds of meters behind me by now. I brace myself for the thing that has been following me. I turn around. Panic strikes. The fog is barely 10 meters away. Facing the fog, I slowly start to walk backwards, away from the fog, not having the nerves to even blink in fear of something exiting the fog without me noticing. But with all my attention on the fog, I do not think about where I put my feet. I hit a root, and all of my balance is lost. I begin to fall backwards and land on my back. As I look back up at the fog, it starts to rise. It looks like the fog is inhaling a huge breath. It stops, and with that, silence again. I try to get up on my feet again, but as I look down on the ground to see where I put my hands, the fog exhales, and with that, a scream. A scream so loud and jarring my ears felt like they would start to bleed. A scream, freezing me with fear, and as I look back up at the fog, it dashes forward. I turn around and begin the run for my life.
My name is Axel, and I have written a short story based on a picture. The picture features many typical Gothic themes, which are present in many horror stories. It features a grave, a cat and a raven, and also a castle in the mist by the sea, which only has a small winding path leading up to it. The grave makes me think of people rising from the dead, obviously the dead, and the cat and the raven are both signs of bad omens, so I take it someone is probably rising from the dead here. And the castle obviously makes me think of the great story Dracula by Bram Stoker. So I also try to take my story in that direction by having someone rise from the dead, from a grave. Yeah, the setting is also in a castle, which really is the same as the picture. This picture is basically my setting as well, so that's good. Another thing I tried to do is I tried to incorporate something of the Romantic era. I remember that it was supposed to be an era of emotion where people, well, really emotional, almost to the extreme. So I tried to incorporate that as well in my story. And here it is. As Cathy explored Baron Frederick's old library with nothing but the glow of a paraffin lamp and the occasional lightning to illuminate her path, she could not help but to feel frightened. Empty bookshelves covered in layers of dust towered ominously above her head and cast intricate patterns of shadows on the cracked marble floor every time the lightning would strike outside. Suddenly, Cathy found a pair of yellow eyes staring into hers from a shelf about 20 meters straight ahead. Petrified with fear, Cathy, incapable of moving a single inch from her position, let out a sound of pure terror. However, her terror-stricken voice was overpowered by a roar of the heavens as an especially powerful lightning lit up the library in a momentary flash of blue light. This allowed Katie to see that the yellow, pupilless eyes belonged to none other than the black cat she had seen this morning. Even though Kathy still felt quite miserable from the shock, and she felt rivers of tears began to flow down her cheeks. The cat seemed to want to do something with her. It wanted her to follow it. Kathy felt dissuaded at first, but when the cat once again let out an urging meow, the tears in her eyes was immediately replaced by a sparkle of curiousness. Kathy followed the mysterious black cat deeper and deeper into the dark labyrinth of bookshelves. As Kathy went deeper into the unknown, she began to realize where the cat was leading her, to the clock tower, which was located in the center of the library. Once Kathy arrived at the clock tower, she gasped for air in fear and surprise, for it was a miracle that the tower was still standing. At least 2/3 of the stone bricks that used to make it up was just simply spread out all over the floor, and the tower itself was only held together by a couple of extremely thick vines curling themselves around the tower in a snake-like fashion. Seeing as the cat went inside, Kathy did as well. Once inside, Kathy once again found herself gasping for air, for inside the tower there was a gravestone. With shaky legs and sweaty hands, she moved closer and raised her paraffin lamp to read the inscriptions on the stone. "Here lies Baron Frederick," it said. Kathy's face cracked up in a wide smile, and she made a mental note to return tomorrow to show her little brothers the grave of their ancestor. But when Kathy inspected the grave closer, her smile froze on her face. For the ground beneath the grave was soft and friable, as if someone had been digging there recently. Meanwhile, the black cat had climbed further up the tower, and now sat listening to the sound of Kathy's heartbeats, which echoed throughout the entire tower. And then, suddenly, there was no echo.